Hello, my name is Aaron Roth. I'm the site manager for Fort Sumner Historic Site, Bosque Redondo Memorial. I'm coming to you live from my home in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. I am now going to remove my mask as I am in my home and I'm adhering to COVID-safe practices. Hello, my name is Aaron Roth. I'm the manager for Fort Sumner Historic Site, Bosque Redondo Memorial. Welcome to our first special program titled Recipes of Remembrance, where we share written history, oral histories, and also a recipe that you can make from home. Our first recipe of this series is titled Slim Fast Coffee. But first, let's learn a little of the site history. The mission of Fort Sumner Historic Site, Bosque Redondo Memorial, is to respectfully interpret the history of the Diné and Inde during the United States government's campaign of ethnic persecution in the 1860s. During this time, now referred to as the Fearing Time, or the Long Walk Period, both tribes were forced to march to the 1 million acre Bosque Redondo Indian Reservation. At the center of this reservation was Fort Sumner, also known as Huelde, or the place of suffering. This concentration camp was truly a place of suffering where the people struggled daily to survive due to mistreatment, starvation, disease, and exposure. At Fort Sumner, crops failed yearly, and as a result, the two tribes were dependent on rations distributed by the United States government. Ration quantities varied throughout the reservation's operation, but were typically 8 ounces of meat, which were salted pork, beef, bacon, or mutton, whichever was available, and 12 ounces of cornmeal or white flour. Occasionally, some salt, sugar, or coffee beans were provided, depending on supply trains. Most tribal members did not know how to prepare these foods, but through intense cultural interactions with soldiers and Spanish settlers, the people found a way. Now that we have learned a little of the site history, I would like to focus a little more on coffee to talk about how this recipe evolved. Coffee beans, when they were given to the Diné and the Inde, were generally unground and unroasted. At first, beans were consumed raw, but after interactions with the soldiers and the settlers, the Diné and the Inde learned to process and make use of the beans for a unique beverage. A lot of our information that we share comes directly from the people most affected by this history. We hear this information through oral stories or oral histories. I would like to take this opportunity to share an oral history that was shared with Ms. Marianne Cortese, who's the president of the Friends of the Bosque Redondo Memorial, while she was giving a tour to a group of visitors one day at the memorial itself. One of the visitors, a Navajo Army veteran, offered a story to explain how his family used rations. And he stated, "I was raised by my grandmother on the homeland. When I joined the armed forces, I was ultimately deployed overseas. I felt sorely homesick and missed my grandmother greatly. To overcome his homesickness," he further explained, that one day I went to the commissary cooks and asked him if he could make something for me because he was feeling so homesick. The cook asked, "What can I make for you?" And he responded, "Slim Fast Coffee." The veteran explained that the cook was immediately puzzled and asked, "Well, what's in it?" The veteran further explained, "It is called Slim Fast Coffee because my grandmother kept her coffee beans in a Slim Fast can. But essentially what you do is you mix bacon fat and white flour together in a hot pan and you make a roux. Then a strong cup of coffee is poured over the mixture until it becomes thick. Then you add sugar to taste." The cook was still puzzled and asked the veteran, "Why does your grandmother drink her coffee that way?" The veteran paused and said, "My grandmother said that her grandmother told her this is how we drank it at Bosque Redondo in order to survive when there was nothing." Now, several years later, when I was a ranger and I was giving a similar talk to another group of people, another Navajo man pulled me aside And he said, we still make that dish. He said, only we don't call it Slim Fast coffee. We actually call it coffee pudding on account that it becomes so thick that you eat it with a spoon. So this is where our recipe today comes from. Now let's talk about the recipe. You will need the following items for this recipe: high-fat bacon, white flour, strong coffee, and white sugar. During our cooking portion, I would like to introduce Miss Alexis Cordova Roth, who has graciously transcribed the Slim Fast coffee recipe from the Navajo oral tradition.
Hi, my name is Alexis Cordova Roth. We're here in my kitchen today, and I'm here to walk you through the making of Slim Fast coffee, which was shared with our site through a Navajo oral history. First thing we're going to do is make about 10 to 12 cups of brewed coffee. Now that our coffee is brewed, we have about 10 to 12 cups of brewed strong coffee here. I have 2 strips of thick cut bacon that I cut in half so it'd fit better in the pan. I'm going to be putting in 1/4 cup plus 1 tablespoon of flour. We have 4 tablespoons of sugar here. I have a wooden spoon, a whisk, and a tablespoon. I also have a medium saucepan here, which we're going to be using. So let's get started. First things first, we're going to turn our heat onto a medium-high heat. Don't be shy. And we're going to take our bacon strips and we're just going to lay them in the pan to start sizzling. Now, if you have a bigger saucepan than this, you can just add some more bacon. We're just going to render this down till we get enough fat to cover the bottom of this saucepan. That's all we're really wanting for this recipe. So you can adjust it if you have a bigger pan. Now that our bacon is looking pretty cooked, the fat has pretty much rendered out of the bacon, so you have a good layer of fat at the bottom of the pan. We're going to take our bacon out. And you see that bacon fat there at the bottom? That's what we want, just a nice layer down there. So we're going to put these to the side, and we're going to go in with our flour. So we're going to start with 1/4 cup. You're just going to see a nice sizzle, and we're just going to incorporate this, okay, right in. And what you want to do is take your wooden spoon and you just want to get all those bits from the bottom. So we're just going to mix this all in. Just get this incorporated. I scraped all the bits off the bottom and it gives it a nice color. Now we're just going to cook this right on down. So this is the consistency you want. It's a little bit thick, not too thick and not too thin, okay? So as you're pouring your 1/4 cup of flour, just pour it a little bit at a time. So you can just keep mixing it, see if the consistency is right, because this is the consistency you want. Depending on the size of pot you have, you may need the whole 1/4 cup flour, and maybe if it's a little smaller than a medium, you might not need as much. So just pour it in slowly until you get a mixture that looks like this. Now we're just going to let this cook down and get a peanut buttery brown color. Okay, so this has been cooking for a few minutes. It looks nice and brown, a peanut buttery brown like we talked about. And we're just going to give it one final mix with our wooden spoon to make sure we have all the bits up from the bottom of the saucepan. We're going to turn our heat down just a little bit, and we're going to add our coffee. And just whisk while you mix in the coffee. We're going to mix in about 5 cups or so just to start, and we're really just going to whisk it. And it's going to start to thicken up and get really nice and glossy. This is really what you want right here. Okay, and it's going to get a little bit thicker. You just want it to look glossy, and we're just going to add a little bit more. Okay. Now, I said 10 to 12 cups, but just add it a little bit at a time Some people like it thicker and some people like it a little thinner. So you choose. If you want it a little thicker, don't add as much coffee. If you want it just a little bit thinner, maybe to drink it in a cup, then you can just add a little bit more coffee. It's all up to you. So now we're just going to give this a minute to cook down. Now we can see that it's coming up to a little bit of a boil. So we're just going to let that boil for a couple of minutes just to cook out and get really nice and combined. So we're just going to keep whisking while this is cooking out. And we're just going to let that go for another 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, so now that we've been simmering for a few minutes, I'm just going to add a little bit more coffee just to thin it out just a little bit, because we are going to be putting these in mugs and enjoying them that way. Okay, that looks perfect to me. We're just going to scrape the sides. Now what we're going to do is add our sugar. I have 4 tablespoons of sugar here that I'm going to add. Of course, you can add more or less, whatever fits your taste. Mix it around just until it's dissolved in the Slim Fast coffee. Okay, now let's turn off our burner. And we're done.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode of Recipes of Remembrance. Thank you to all of our supporters out there, and thank you for tuning in. And tune in next week for our next episode. Here's to remembering. Cheers.
Cheers.